like right now you're not getting the opportunities you want, you're going to feel total failure, and that's not sustainable. You will give up, right? I mean, how I would give up if I was in a position of only wanting to get into editorial illustration, contacting hundreds of art directors in the editorial space and not hearing back from any of them. That would be totally discouraging. Hey guys, it's me, Tom Froese. I'm an illustrator and a top teacher on Skillshare, where I've helped tens of thousands of students unlock the world of commercial illustration. Welcome to the episode. Today I have an answer to one of your questions, which I'm excited to get into. But first I just want to update you on my new class. It's called the One-Palette Illustrator. If you struggle with choosing colors in your work and achieving the kind of consistency and confidence that you want in your illustration, I made this class for you. So the link is up in the show notes, and I'll also be sharing 25 free access links to the class in this video. That means you can take the entire class, all 3 hours of it, without paying for a premium membership on Skillshare. So watch carefully and hopefully you'll get in on the action. If you're watching way in the future and missed out on this chance, you can still use the link in the show notes to get 1 month premium access if you've never signed up for Skillshare before. And you can use that not only to have access to my class, you can use that link to access all my classes and all the other classes available up on Skillshare. So the subject of today's question is how to attract the kind of illustration work that you want, especially when you're starting out. So this question comes from a fellow illustrator over Instagram, and basically I'm going to give my response to her question kind of point by point, and then following that I'll be giving some tips, some very actionable tips for how to move forward for anyone. So here's her question. She writes, after working 3 years in architecture, I decided to start a career in illustration, which is my true passion. Since the end of 2019, I've had 3 to 4 clients, one of them long-term in publishing. But this year, I started contacting art directors because I really want to work in editorial. I've contacted approximately 120 throughout the year, and I've still had no success. I know that consistency along with improving my portfolio is key, but I don't know how long I can keep up if there's still no success. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong. So thank you very much for your question. Your question is really just filled with a lot of the struggles and pain points that are common to beginning illustrators. I think you're at that stage where it's really the hardest, one of the hardest parts of your career, because you have to get that momentum to lift off. There's a lot of uncertainty, you need to put in a lot of effort, because getting those first few clients is really hard, those ones that are really going to get your machine gears turning. It's hard to find those first clients that are going to trust you to illustrate for them. So here are some of my responses to your questions, kind of point by point, and we'll get into them now. So you say you've had some limited experience working as an illustrator for publishers. So I would ask, which publishers and what kind of illustration have you been doing for them? And the reason I would ask this question is, how does the illustration you're doing now line up with the kind of illustration you want to do, which is in editorial? So how much alignment is there in any of the work you've been doing with what you would like to be doing? And the reason you need to answer this kind of question is because, of course, editorial illustration could be kind of similar to what you've been doing or very different. And if it's very different, sometimes if an illustration category is so different from what you've been doing, it's almost like starting over again, and you need to make sure you have work within that category. In this case, we're talking about editorial, and we'll get more into some more details about that kind of thing in a bit. So you've decided to switch over to illustration from architecture. So I would ask why? Like, I know that illustration is your passion, and of course you want to jump from architecture into illustration because you love illustration, you want to illustrate, but why would you leave a respectable creative career like architecture to do something like illustration where you clearly are starting from the beginning and may not feel as confident in? And kind of a follow-up to that is what clues do you have at this point that you can actually pull off the switch? Now, I don't say this in a way that is in any way meant to be intimidating. It's really just a matter of being honest with yourself. You have this career that I presume that you've enjoyed success in, but you're just not satisfied in, which is architecture. And architecture, as far as I know, has a lot of creativity in it and problem solving. And obviously, there must have been a point in time when you thought this would be the thing that you wanted to do. The answer to this question is really going to guide you through some of the most hardest parts of beginning as an illustrator, especially those times when you feel like giving up. Why are you becoming an illustrator? Why do you want to make this jump? Do you really believe you can make it happen? And more importantly, are you willing to go through the hard struggles that are necessary to make that kind of a switch, especially if you don't have formal education in illustration, especially if you don't have a lot of connections or experience? It's going to take a lot of time to get where you want to be. So you really have to know why you're doing it. And I think most importantly, you need to know that you love illustration more than anything else. And that alone could keep you going. I know that for me, every time I've wanted something that felt kind of like I was not there, but I really wanted to. And when I got in, the way I got into illustration and before that into design was just by loving it so much that I was willing to risk total failure. And so that's the kind of mindset anyone in your position needs to have in order to really make things work. So moving on to your next point in your question, you wish to get into editorial illustration. I touched on this already. So what does your current portfolio suggest in terms of your strengths? Have you done any work that at all would attract an art director at an editorial? Also very important in this is, who are your dream editorial clients? Who are your heroes in this space in terms of illustrators? You mentioned having 120 different art directors that you contacted, and we're going to get more into this in a little bit as well. I keep jumping the gun, but there must be just a handful of those that are your favorite. And within that, there must be some illustrators that you admire the most. And I want you to focus on those publications and those artists as your source of inspiration, because I believe 120 might be too many. And again, I'm going to get more into that in a minute, but I really think that in order to get into a space, you need to know what your niche in that space is. So editorial illustration is very broad, as you know. It covers lots and lots of ground. And so you want to find like just a smaller subset in there. Maybe it's based on your hobbies. Like maybe you like running and you want to have an illustration in a running magazine, that kind of thing. You want to kind of focus in based on something that's important to you, not just generally that you want to illustrate. Another thing just in terms of getting into the editorial space is you may have like the dream client. So maybe it's like Runner's World or something like that in this example, but maybe you just need to find less high bar clients to start with. So instead of going to like a national magazine, maybe you can find something much more local and someone who's looking for, they want to include illustrations but can't necessarily afford them. These kind of lower bar clients are what beginners often need to do to, break into an industry, and you'll end up having to work for much less pay than you'd like, and sometimes even free. You kind of have to be creative with building up your own opportunities. Another point in this editorial space question is, are you interested in pursuing other kinds of illustration just to keep things open? So yes, you want to get into the editorial space, but meanwhile, there may be other kinds of illustration that you're more experienced in that you can do to keep illustrating, and all the while sort of trying to steer your work more toward the editorial space. And that's something very much that I've done in my career is I get work that I'm not like super excited about all the time, or I want to break into a subset of illustration that I'm not yet in. Like at a certain point, I wanted to get into kids' books. I had never illustrated kids' books. I'd never worked in the publishing industry before. So somehow I had to just, I mean, part of it's just like hoping, right? And I can't really like give you tips on how to hope, but you also have to kind of steer your illustration in a way that looks like it might work in that category. While you're hoping you get illustration in editorial, you can also be illustrating perhaps for these same publishing clients that already know you. And then there may be other avenues to kind of just keep cutting your teeth and building up your portfolio. And you just maybe want to sneak in more editorial style illustrations with these other kinds of clients if you're able. So now we're going to get onto the part of your message that I think for me raised the most questions, or just it got my mind firing up. And this is where you said you've contacted 120 art directors in the past year. So if you've sent out an email to that many art directors and you haven't had any responses, that indicates that there's a problem. And that problem could include one or more of the following. So the first possible problem is that you're just not ready in terms of your work. Your portfolio is not where it needs to be in order to get the kind of work that you want. So in this case, you just need to find a way of building up your portfolio. And this you've already mentioned in your question. You said you know that you need to build up your portfolio, that's key, and that's absolutely right. This is kind of like the no-brainer answer, but it needs to be said because it's the most true. Now, the hard thing is that building up a portfolio could take more time than you want. And if you've made this jump into an illustration career from architecture before having things lined up, this is just going to make things all the harder. I'm a big believer in not making big jumps. So anything that I've done to get to the next stage in my career, if it's like a really big change, I try to do in the least painful way possible. I guess I try and be smart about it and not go all in. I have made failures. I've taken risks and failed on some of them, but I've always had a sense or clues that I might have what it takes and I may be able to sustain myself along the way. Moving into illustration, for instance, I was a designer before that and I had just started getting more illustration work on the side, and I just kind of had the sense that there were enough clients going that at least in the short term, I could make things work. And at least by taking on those illustration clients in the short term, I would be building up my experience in my portfolio and therefore being able to really, I mean, it was almost win-win. Like even if it didn't work out and I had to go back to being a designer and not a full-time illustrator, I would still have more illustration experience that I couldn't have gone if I didn't go all in. So that's a question for you to ask, like, what's a more logical thing for you to do right now? Like, should you keep your job as an architect and then moonlight as an illustrator? So meanwhile, you're able to pay the bills and, live a comfortable lifestyle. But of course, you'll have to spend your free time illustrating and working on that as well, on top of anything else that you have going. Maybe you have a family, maybe you're a parent, I don't know. That might be one scenario versus just jumping all in and feeling that sense of anxiety and despair about not getting the work that you want, not only because you want it, but because you need it. Because if you're not getting those jobs, you're not getting fed. So I kind of summarize it in this question. What's harder? Moonlighting as an illustrator while you pay the bills in your currently more qualified position as an architect, or not having a reliable income source, but having all day to illustrate? Those are two possible scenarios. In the one case, you keep your job as an architect while you build up your portfolio on the side and just kind of wait for more of those clues to build up where you finally kind of get a sense where it's not like actually a huge jump into illustration. It's sort of like you're I think it's a frog. If you put it in hot water and you boil the water slowly, the frog will just stay in the water. And it happened so gradually, the frog didn't even know it was happening to him. And it's maybe kind of a weird metaphor, but that's kind of, I think, how I like to approach things as much as possible. Mitigate as much risk as possible while still trying. Be illustrating, let it be a slow burn, do it on the side, but don't make it a life or death situation. Gradually it happens. And one day you look back and you see that you've been doing all this work and you're like, I don't even feel like I made a jump. This is just part of what I believe is a possible approach to mitigate that feeling of life or death and anxiety that we tend to do if we make just like this big leap, we go all in. And failure could really hurt us if we do that, rather than it being more of something we can just learn by, but keep going. So another possible problem that might be indicated by having none of these 120 art directors contact you back is that your approach to self-promotion and contacting art directors is not working for you. So given that you've approached 120 different art directors, to me says that you may be doing what's called the pray and spray approach, meaning you're just kind of sending your work out to as many art directors as you can, and in the process, none of your submissions, none of the things that you're sending out feel personalized to the recipients. In other words, the art directors receiving your email might just feel like you're just one of the thousands of people trying to get a job without any attempt at connecting in a more personal, kind of custom way. So I don't know what your approach has been, so I'm speaking more in general terms, and this is just something for you to consider. I don't think I could name 60 magazines or art directors, let alone 120. That's a lot of people to be in touch with in the span of a year. I think you need to pick the ones that feel the most aligned with who you are as an artist in terms of style, perspective, and even lifestyle. And I touched on this before when I was talking about the running magazine example. So you want to be a fan of the magazine. You want to be a fan of the art directors if you can, meaning like, who's the art director of your favorite magazines? What are they posting on social media? Follow them. Follow their Twitter account. Follow their Instagram. Yeah, so I would challenge you to choose, just out of these 120 that you've sent out to, just choose 10. 10 publications or art directors that you want to get in touch with. And when you get in touch, this is kind of key, I think. Don't solicit your portfolio. Don't say, check out my work, I'd love to work for you. I know that sometimes we should be being very direct like that, but I think someone in your case where you maybe aren't getting the kind of response that you want, maybe try a different approach. Get in touch as a fan or as someone who just has a question, or even just send a note to let them know you're a big fan and to thank them. That alone will kind of register and be more memorable to an art director than getting just an email asking if you look at their portfolio. So if you have something you'd like to send them, like not as a self-promotion, but more as a gift, then you can do that. If you have a postcard, if you've made some kind of thing that's based on your work, that's awesome. Like try and send that to them, because that actually will be received as a gift. It will be received as a gesture of kindness, not as a gesture of, how can you help me? And that always goes down well with art directors who get tons and tons of how can you help me kind of requests. So of course, this doesn't guarantee you're going to get hired, but it will almost guarantee that you'll be noticed and appreciated far more than what the art director may perceive as a random, desperate illustrator. Again, I'm not saying this about the person asking this question specifically, but this may be a perception that the art director is receiving just on the style of email that they're receiving. So, on a personal note, as an aside, I receive many emails from various people trying to either get hired by me or to have me teach off their new online platform. So a lot of these are actually kind of just like really random, like people just asking me to hire them to improve the SEO on my website. I don't know about you guys, but I get like tons of these, to the point where I've just filtered out in Gmail. Like I've just set a filter. Anything that says SEO it gets junked. I also, more recently, this is kind of something that started with the pandemic when people started moving more to online learning platforms. A lot of learning platforms kind of came on the scene, and they're looking for, they're looking for teachers to offer on their platform. So I'm getting a lot of requests because I'm a Skillshare teacher. They just find me that way, I assume. And I just get so many of them, and I can just tell that they don't know who I am. They're just looking for so-called talent to add to their own rosters. So it's just white noise to me after a while. So again, most of the time they're just emailing me a stock email. I can tell that they've just used a template and inserted a few lines to make it sound like they know my work. Like you can tell that there's sometimes you can even see the font change when it's like an email like, hello, we love your work, and then new font. I especially love such and such a piece that you did for do, and then back to the old font, the rest of the email. Sometimes you can tell blatantly, and sometimes just based on how many emails I get, I can just tell, I can see the pattern in a template, and I can tell right away that it's not a special opportunity for me at all. Now, people in an art director's position, or even in this way in my position, when you get that many emails, it does take a little bit of something extra to get our attention. And so feeling like it's directed personally at us, and that it's a little bit more special feeling, it goes a long way. So again, I delete most of these emails in my example before even reading the subject line. I can just see it, and I'm not interested, and off it goes. So again, we're talking about sending out to 120 art directors and not having any success. So the third possible problem here is that you're not presenting your work in the right way. So that means your work, no matter how good it is, no matter how capable you are as an illustrator, if you're not showing it well, it might get overlooked. So maybe that means that your Instagram feed is inconsistent or shows too much process without anything looking that finished, or you want to give that ready to hire impression, and maybe that's just not happening just by what you're posting right now. Maybe it means that your portfolio website isn't presenting your work in the right light. So does your portfolio feel full enough? Does it have the kind of work that you're trying to get? And what does it say about who you are and what you are like to work with? And, all these things need to be to come through, not necessarily like in concrete terms, but you need to think about what kind of impression you're giving with your primary channels of promoting yourself, whether that's your portfolio, your Instagram account, something on Behance, anything like that. So when people go to your website, do they get a sense of how experienced you are? Do they get a sense of what your unique voice is? Do they know where your work has shown up? Ultimately, I think one of the big questions a portfolio website should answer is, why would a client trust you and hire you to illustrate for them? So these are big questions to ask, but certainly important. And especially if you're trying to get the attention of art directors, you want to make sure the work that they're going to see of yours, wherever that might be, is up to snuff. So these are just my initial responses to your question. I haven't looked at your work, so please don't see any of my reactions as a direct reaction to your abilities. But of course, I want to help you and anyone else who's trying to break into the illustration world, and especially if they have dreams of entering a more specific market within it, like editorial, as in your case. So before I do, I just want to remind you to like this video if you're finding it helpful, and to subscribe if you want to know when new videos like this go up. Likes and subscribes are the best way for you to directly support my efforts here on YouTube. But enough with that. So let's get into the last part of the video, how to attract the work you want when nobody's giving you your big break. So my first tip is to have good work. This is the most obvious thing and almost doesn't need to be said, but it does need to be said because it's the most important link. If you don't have good work, if you don't have work that shows your craft and your abilities, you're not going to get the work. So I don't think I need to belabor that one. So the next tip is to present your work well. And we had just talked about this a few moments ago, But really, it's one thing to have good work. It's a whole other thing to present it in a way that attracts people, the people that you want to attract, in a way that tells the story you want to tell. So without getting too deep into this is a whole other can of worms. I would say look at the illustrators that you admire. Like look up who is doing work that you like. Go find their websites, go find their Instagram feeds and see what they're doing and take notes. Do what you can to model what you consider to be their most successful best practices in your own portfolio. I'm not saying copy someone's portfolio outright, but if someone's presenting in a nice, super clean, minimal Squarespace template and it looks good, maybe you can find a Squarespace template that looks similar and you can present your own work in it. I would say the most important thing in a portfolio isn't the template at all, it's your work. But then you might get a sense of like, how are the artists that you admire presenting their work in terms of consistency? You don't know what they're excluding, but you can see what they are including. And you can kind of take notes about like, what's the through line? What story are they telling in their work? What is their about page like? What is their contact page? You know, how are they asking to get in touch? All these things are things that we don't just make up. You can go to someone else's website and be inspired by it. The next tip is to engage in regular daily projects. I think all artists looking to start a career, I think so many professional artists working today, I should say, started by just making work on their own time, on their own dime. I think Andy J. Pizza talks a lot about his, I think it was called The Land of Nod. It's like he made a monster every day and he made monsters in this world called Nod. And sometimes he was happy with it, sometimes he wasn't, but over time he got noticed. And this is just a thing that I think is a pattern with a lot of successful artists. I don't mean to be self-congratulatory, but I would include myself in this kind of a story. Early on while I was in art school, I'm learning about illustration, but I don't have a career. I'm learning about design. I had a blog called Draw Something Every Day. And I just basically copied the format of a blogger that I admired. And I'm not saying I wish it wasn't as imitative. And her name is Lauren Nassif. She had a blog called, I think, a drawing a day. And so I created a blog called Draw Something Every Day. And I talk about this in my Skillshare class, the style class. Yeah, but I was inspired by her. I wasn't copying her drawings. I was making my own drawings. And I just did that every day. Through that practice, in many ways, I built up the early stages of my illustration career. I started getting noticed for how I drew, and I also started getting feedback from people. So make daily projects. And again, my Skillshare class called the Style Class is all about this. So I encourage you to check that out. My next tip is to be an entrepreneur. So by that I mean, you have to think outside the illustration box. You can't just wait for someone to be your client, an art director to call you up. If you're not getting the work that you want, and you won't at first, that's almost the most certain thing, is you're not going to get the work you want at first in your career. You need to be an entrepreneur. You need to make your own opportunities. You need to, and I'm going to get into this in the next point, you need to collaborate with friends, with like-minded creatives, and get your work out in the world and think about where it can show up in any way that you can. One of the ways that I've been doing this, and I still do this, and I think a big kickstart for my illustration career started in this. I had a friend, he's a letterpress printer. I've always been interested in letterpress printing, and we collaborated and we've created letterpress products, like entire lines of postcards and prints that we sell, and kind of within a certain market, they've become, for me, they were successful, and they connected me to people and built up my reputation, especially here in Canada as a Canadian illustrator, because our projects were always, themed around what it means to be Canadian, and that it's kind of nerdy, but that's what it was. And today, I think still I have a reputation for being a Canadian illustrator in Canada because of these projects. So be an entrepreneur. Next thing is to collaborate. This is the next tip, the fifth tip. Collaborate. By that I mean find like-minded souls and work with them. What happens is you make all kinds of connections. Now, another anecdote from my letterpress story that I was just talking about, my first few projects, it was, yes, get me in there illustrating, creating prints based on my own work, but also make it a group thing. Invite illustrators that I admire, some of them who were at my level, most of whom were actually like well beyond me and with whom I didn't deserve a place in this collaboration, but still I was audacious enough to try. What happened was we all got a fun project to work on. We all got to have it letterpress, but then each one of us promoted the project, which means, think about it. I mean, if I were, this first collaboration was 10 people and each of us are sharing the work. It's me sharing my work with my audience, but 9 other people sharing my work with their audiences. And so it's exponential. So collaborating is a way of not only doing more illustration work that you want to do, it's a way of kind of grouping up and building some community, but it's also a way of exponentially increasing your reach and influence. So collaborate. The 6th tip, and we have 7 tips to get through here. The 6th tip is to get featured. Whenever you make an illustration that you're super excited about, share it. Try and get it. I think there's lots of hashtag type illustration Instagram accounts, like They Draw and Travel or They Draw and Cook. Those are just 2 off the top of my mind. But let's just say you make a food themed illustration that you're really excited about. You can tag it They Draw and Cook. If they see it and they love it, they'll maybe repost it, or you can get in touch with them directly, and they can't know you made it unless you tell them. And there's no guarantee of what the outcome of that will be, but I think you should always be aiming to get your work shared by other people, whoever possible, wherever possible, whether that's on Facebook, with your family. Get featured, get blogged, get Instagrammed, get retweeted. Again, that's a rabbit hole to go down, but this is just one way of expanding your reach. And expanding your reach and being out in the wild and findable is one of the biggest keys to getting work as an illustrator. Okay, gotta take a breath here. The last tip is to broaden your idea of success. And this one's a big one. I'm a huge proponent of not being a victim to your circumstances. And I know we all come into illustration from different levels of privilege and opportunity. There's no denying that. But I think along the way, I think the people who come out on top, they don't get held back by their own limitations. They have a no-fail mentality. So right now, perhaps your idea of success is to get into editorial illustration. If that's all you're focused on, you're going to notice that, like right now, you're not getting the opportunities you want. You're going to feel total failure, and that's not sustainable. You will give up, right? I mean, how I would give up if I was in a position of only wanting to get into editorial illustration, contacting hundreds of art directors in the editorial space and not hearing back from any of them. That would be totally discouraging. So I would say broaden your idea of success. Look at ways you can be a part of the illustration community in ways that you're ready for now. Maybe you're just ready to go to conferences and to show up and meet people. Yes, that doesn't mean you're illustrating. It doesn't mean your work's getting featured or shared, but it is a step you can take. And the success is in meeting fellow illustrators. Maybe success means getting a postcard that you made in the hands of one of your favorite illustrators that you meet at an illustration conference. And this is just one example. Maybe being successful is using some skills that you already possess. And going back to the original question in this video here, if you're an architect, you have all kinds of skills. What skills from the architecture world can you use to get a foot into the illustration world? Maybe you're a good writer, maybe you're a really good problem solver, maybe you can work for clients on something that's maybe not as juicy as an editorial illustration, but it is some kind of something that helps you use architectural skills in a way that really helps people solve a problem. And be okay with that, you know, and keep your eyes open for opportunities to make the overlap of your current skills and abilities with your aspirational illustration abilities, and try and make that overlap increasingly more overlappy. So broaden your idea of success. I hope that's clear. Look for opportunities using what you have where you are. And actually, this is actually a good opportunity to tell you a little metaphor that I've been thinking of lately. It's kind of an anecdote. So my daughter and I were playing Scrabble the other day, and we just got a Scrabble board, and she's 9 and it's her first time playing Scrabble, and she's doing great. But every time she'd get letters, she'd say, "Oh, I wish I had these other letters, then I could spell this." And I had to remind her, like, Scrabble's it's not about wishing what letters you didn't have. It's about working with the letters you do have. So if you get mostly vowels on your little tray, you got to work with those as best as you can. And you have to kind of be forgiving with yourself about the fact that it's not your fault that you got all vowels, but you do have a little bit of agency to spell something with those letters. And it might not be great, but the only way to get more opportunities, the only way to get more of those letters on your tray is by giving up the ones that are already on it. So you got to use those in order to get new ones. You got to use the opportunities you have now to get new ones. And the opportunities that you have now may feel like they're not going to earn you a lot of points, but you got to let those ones go and do your best with them. And maybe you'll get ones with higher points. I really like this Scrabble analogy because it's so true to anyone in illustration. We're never gonna be as good as we want to be. We're never gonna be exactly where we wanna be. There's always gonna be a higher level of success that we haven't achieved. I've done way more in my career than I've ever thought possible, and still I'm unsatisfied. And there's still, if I only had that one letter changed, then I could spell the 7-letter word, get 50 points plus 67 points, and win the game. You gotta just do your best with what you have. And that's what I mean by broaden your terms of success. So those are my tips for how to get the work that you wanna get before you've had your big break. And now I'm just gonna leave it over to you guys. What about you? What is your dream project or client, and what has been your experience in trying to get there? So what are your success stories, and what have been your challenges and pain points? Please let us know in the comments. I always love reading them and answering your questions as well. So please keep those questions coming. Please keep those comments coming. Your likes, subscribes, they all mean a lot to me. That's all for today. I'll see you in the next video.